Hi, my name's Desiree Diaz,
I'm Sarah Bilski.
I'm Katie Fi.
Cassidy Burris.
and we're going to be answering some questions over the videos we've watched. So, our first question is, what are some commonalities between the lives of Nanavi, Jefferson, and Joab? And what do you think are some of the reasons for these commonalities? I put that some of the commonalities between these three students is that they all face socioeconomic challenges, and that impact that impacts their access to education. And something I noticed in all three of them is that they portray like resilience to overcome the challenges that they faced when they were younger, whether if it was poverty, a loss of a family member, or playing that parental role for their younger siblings. Um, and I also believe that they share these commonalities because they see education as a way for a better future. And they also live in similar conditions where there's barriers like underfunded schools or gender inequalities in unsafe environments. And so it just makes their desire for a better future. Yeah.
Okay. So kind of to like bounce off of that, I one of the biggest things I noticed, and I guess the thing that stuck out to me the most being a teacher was the classroom environment and all of the settings. Definitely not something that we see here, necessarily like in the schools that we're in, not seeing environments like that. So that for me was a pretty obvious commonality between all of them. Um, And a reason that they could be like that, I think probably just where they're at, more impoverished areas. We don't necessarily deal with that, especially directly where we live. It's not necessarily a situation that we're directly dealing with. But of course, over there in countries like that and areas like they're in, that's a more common issue that they're dealing with. So for me, that was probably a pretty obvious commonality that I was able to tie between all three of the situations. So,
Um, and then going off what they said, I I agree with both of you. I also noticed that they're all three, living in poverty. They've all they all typically only had like one parent, and all of those kids had to, like Desiree said, take on more of that like leadership role. Um, and then going off of what Sarah said, I also noticed that the schools had very limited resources. Um, I also noticed something that like stuck out to me was that they all like walked to school,
Mhm.
and stuff like that. Um, and then a reason for the commonalities, I would say, yeah, it's just like it's where they're at, it's where they live. There's not a lot of money, not a lot of resources, and I think that's something that they all share as well.
My answers are very similar to all of y'all's. I said that all three students were living in a poverty-stricken area. One thing I noticed is that a few of them, or all of them, moved around a few times. So they were being taken out of their environment and put in a new one, or they left on their own. Um, I think that because of that and their home lives and their experiences, they went through a lot of hardships, but like Sarah said, they pushed through those in their own ways in the end. So they viewed education in a very positive way, and it was like a way out for them. Um, and then I agree with y'all. I think that because of where they're at and their country's economic state and just kind of their environment is what is causing those commonalities between them.
Yeah, okay, so I guess that like leads us into question two, which asks, school is often away from difficult situations. Having viewed these three case studies, what do you think of that idea? Would you consider these success stories? So when I was answering this, I basically um, agreed that education can provide opportunities for students, but barriers like poverty and inequality can limit someone's success. And then I use Nanavi's community as an example. It showed inequality with women and it sets women back from being successful. So certain girls are chosen to get to go to school, and not all girls get the same opportunity to better their lives. And then while they're ed so going back to all three of their stories, while their education journeys are inspiring, I don't think they quite fully are considered success stories because I feel like that's more long term of where they end up when they're adults, and we didn't get to see that.
Yeah, I kind of agree with that. In the beginning it kind of sh it shows them, in all the videos, it shows them all in school and doing well and being successful. And then as you get a little farther into a few of the videos, it kind of starts, I guess, showing more of the reality of what they're dealing with. Specifically, like in Jefferson's case, that was the kid from Brazil. Um, they were in an area where there was a lot of drug dealing going on. And in the video, it's literally specifically said, like, he was doing really well, he was really successful until he hit a certain age. I think it was like middle school or something. And there becomes these distractions, such as girls or drugs or this and that and another. And so going back to the question, like, school is held as a way out from difficult situations. Yes, I agree with that, but I don't know that that's necessarily always the case. For some kids, it is a safe space. I do agree with that. Like even in what we deal with as teachers here in Texas, I think it is a safe space for kids. Um, but for some kids, it's not. For some kids, it's, not the place they want to be, sadly. So as far as the three stories that we reviewed, what I consider these success stories, I think some of them, I think with the first one with Nanavi, she did have to drop out of school, but at the end it did, talk about she was doing this photography internship or whatever. And so I think, it kind of talked about how regardless of where she was at now, I think school definitely benefited her in a way. And so I kind of feel like that's similar to kind of how it ties into the other stories as well.
I I also agree with a lot of what you guys said. Whenever, like, the question says school is often seen as a way out from difficult situations, and I feel like in all three stories, you could tell that they, I don't want to say preferred their lives at school, but I feel like their lives at school were a lot easier than their home lives. Um, and I feel like that in a way is a success because it's like providing them space from outside of their environments. But like y'all said, down the road in a lot of those stories, they weren't able to either like complete school or things got harder as they got older. Um, so I don't know if I would necessarily say that they're success stories either. Um, but I do agree that school, like y'all said, definitely helped them get a little bit further, help them learn more, help them grow more. But yeah, all in all, asking if they're success stories, I would also probably say no.
Agree that um, school for students is viewed as a way out of difficult situations. But like Sarah said, it also brings difficult situations to other kids. I think in the experiences of the kids in these case studies, um, that based off of how they talked about it, it was a way for them to get out of their situations. Um, and I think in their own ways, individually, either they were successful or have potential to be successful. Um, in Nanavi's case, like Sarah said, she didn't finish school, but she found success in a different area and she was still learning. Um, I think in Jefferson and Joab's case, um, we didn't get to see the end of their stories, and they struggled a little bit, but ended up talking about trying to get back on track. So I think they potentially have um, the case of being successful. I think as the country as a whole, as they were in, what I noticed is that at the end of the videos, it was like they've increased by 40% in education, or they've increased by this percent. And so as countries, it's increasing in success. It's just not there yet compared to other countries.
Yeah, I agree with that. I forgot about that, how they showed the increase in the percentages. And so they are improving. Um, but yeah. So I'm going to go ahead and split up number three. So first, I'm going to answer, how do these children's lives compare to the children you have worked with or grew up with? So for that, after reflecting from the videos and comparing it to the classrooms in the United States, I could tell right off the bat that the student to teacher ratio was significantly different. In the United States, students are more capable of having a successful career, even when there are students in the US that have barriers like poverty as well. They typically have more resources still in the US, like they have free or reduced breakfast and lunch, whereas in the video, who was it? Joab, he said if he couldn't get food for him and his siblings, then they would just sleep, so they wouldn't feel hungry. And also, like, I forgot which one of you mentioned how they walk to school. We have bus service. These kids in the videos were walking like an hour, 2 hours to school, and at least in Texas, that's not a thing. Um, but yeah, that's what I got for the first half for question three.
Yeah, something I wanted to point out is how like in Nana V's story, her when she first got, into the program to go to school, she had to live away from home during the week to go to school. So she had to live with her grandma during the week to go to school. And then her father passes away, and she basically like the home can't survive. They need her at home, but mom doesn't want her back home, and it's just like this whole thing. And I think there's versions of that story for kids that we may see. Not in that specific way, not to that maybe extent. Um, but I'm sure like we see kids at some point that are going through things at home similar to that, right? Again, not to that extent, but um, kids that are struggling with things at home that are carrying that weight on their shoulders and trying to process and deal with that at a young age. And so while, we may not see it to that extent, I think comparing them, I think we see some similarities with our children for sure, that we're dealing with. Um, and then something else about like the schools in Brazil were kind of like in Jefferson's case, those to me, those classrooms looked like the most similar to what we would see. I think, kind of taking those in a comparison, that would look the most similar, I guess, to what like our students would see in our rooms. And then also one last thing I wanted to talk about was the on their daily walks to school in Jefferson's story in Brazil, it was very dangerous to walk to school, right? They're worried about gunshots or wars or, all this kinds of stuff. And while our kids may get to ride the bus, some, do walk, or some are walking to the bus in a neighborhood that's not safe. And so, in specific parts, at least I'm in Houston, specific parts of Houston, kids deal with that, and it's a scary reality that I think no matter where you are, there's always that risk of stuff like that being a problem. Um, so yeah, that was my thoughts on that one.
Um, I So what I compared this to like the kids that I'm currently teaching. I teach in a very high income area. So I mean, there's complete contrast because the kids that I'm teaching, they will never know, what poverty is like or anything like that. So seeing all of these stories and seeing like the reality of the rest of the world, I mean, it's completely different and um it's just they don't have the resources. Um their home lives are so different. And I mean, like y'all said, there are some kids in other areas who might experience similar, like, being hungry at home. That happens everywhere. There's not enough food. People have, lower incomes living in poverty. But in contrast, it's way different. It's two opposite ends of the spectrum. Um, and um, yeah, that's what I compared it to, just seeing two opposite ends. Kind of lost my train of thought there. Sorry. But yeah, that's what I got for that one.
So, um, I compared it to my personal like area growing up, and then the area that I'm teaching in now. They're neighborhood, like neighboring cities, but they are very different. Um, so when I was growing up, it was in a very middle class, like upper middle class suburban area, and our population of lower income homeless was very low. So we didn't have, like, I didn't have that comparison when I was growing up to the experiences in the case study. Um, where I'm currently teaching is a Title IX school, and we have a lot of immigrants from South America and a lot of homeless students. So they have very similar stories to the ones in the case studies. Um, and there, I have some kids who are from Brazil, and so they know that area, they know that life. And I personally will never know that life, have never known that life. So it's been very interesting um, learning through them and trying to see their perspectives on it. But it's like a whole different life. Like those kids have lived an entire life and they're 11 years old. So that's kind of what I compared it to, and their experiences and specifically, the Brazil case study.
Wow.
So when they came to you, Cassidy, did they like speak English? Were they like ready to be acclimated into your environment, or was it
Um,
like a culture shock?
so some of them, yes, and then majority of them, like I have 8 different class periods, and I teach English to 6 of them. Um, and my first 2 periods are majority of my ELL students, and majority of them are from South American countries. Um, More than half of them did not know English, and so I got them the first day. They had no idea what I was saying, and I had no idea what they were saying, and I didn't have any help. Like I didn't have a translator, didn't have anything because we are full immersion. Um, so while they can do well in other classes, in an English language arts class, it's not going for them, and so it's interesting. From the beginning of the year to now, there's been a lot of growth in them. So immersion works, but they're also getting a second English class teaching them English. I just don't teach them.
That's
Wow.
really interesting. I feel
Yeah.
like that's like another assignment we have for another class was talking about like immersion, like emerging, and like there's pros and cons to all of it.
Yeah.
It's just hard at first to imagine like putting a kid so young in a school with a bunch of other kids who has no idea what's going. I mean, the thought of that personally just blows my mind, and it's crazy.
Yeah. I originally was translating things for them. And then the bilingual coordinator for the district like came in and was like, you can't translate anything for them.
Wow. Well,
No
I'm glad
idea
you're like,
It's so
what anything means. What do you mean?
it's
Fine.
so interesting because I in my school we also have like a lot of kids that come in from other countries, but it's different because you can tell like the comparisons of where they come from because they usually come and they're like pretty much ready because like the schools they're coming from are like teaching them other languages. I have had a few where they speak limited English, but it's like they understand enough to get by. So it's like interesting, like depending on where they come from, it's like how prepared they are to transition to over. That's so interesting. I'm
wow.
getting off track, but
Yeah, that's really interesting and how they're progressing too. So that's good.
yeah.
Yeah.
So the second part of question three asked, what are some strengths of each environment? What are some strengths of each environment portrayed? So in Nanavi's community, I put the increase shown to push for girls' education. So that shows a shift in their cultural views because, like it said in the video, not many girls did get to go to school. They would select them. And in Jefferson's school, I put that it like that they provide them a safe place from like the war and drug dealers, and it fosters resilience in students. Um, and then in Joab's school, I put despite the overcrowding, students still show determination and a deep value for learning. Like in the video, they were so engaged with the songs and the teacher. Um, and I just found that amazing, even though there was like 70 of them. But yeah, that's what I put.
Um, I really was interested in Jefferson's story as far as like this question goes. Kind of like we were talking about, despite this, the situation, despite what's going on or how many kids are in the class, the teacher was doing a great job of like being super engaging and, the kids were really receptive of that. And I feel like that's a big problem, at least personally, I deal with in middle school, like getting their attention and then being receptive of my attention, like it's a battle constantly. But it was really interesting to see how, these kids were genuinely like seemed grateful to be at school and were just very intrigued with what was going on. And I feel like we don't see a whole lot of that here. And I think it's because here, education is not necessarily a privilege, it's like a necessity. And so the kids don't doesn't mean as much to them as it does to the other kids. So anyways, that's kind of off topic of the question, but I guess a strength again would be the teacher's engagement with the students, specifically like in Jefferson's case. So
I had very similar answers to Desiree. I also said that the strength of Nanabi's story was that they were trying to, change that culture, that like mindset of that women shouldn't go to school, and they're trying to like bring more women into school. Um, and then similar to Sarah, um, the schools in for Jefferson and Joab, um, they were very good about like the teacher engagement and providing like a safe space for these kids. And then just in all with all three students, exactly what Cassidy said, it not Cassidy, sorry, Sarah, it brings like an appreciation, like a deeper value for their education because like you said, it's a privilege for them to go. So I feel like they just find more appreciation for it, and they stay more engaged and they want to learn, they stay motivated and determined. So yeah, that's what I got.
The main thing that I thought was a strength in all three of the case studies was that their teachers or mentors in Nanavi's case at the end. She didn't really have teachers. She had like a mentor with her photography. But they were there and they were calming and they were there to help those kids, regardless of how many kids they had. And I think that um, the teacher kind of makes or breaks your relationship with education. Um, I know that I've had some really great teachers and I've had some that kind of made me hate learning and hate school. So for those kids who view it as a privilege, having those teachers or mentors that truly care about them and want to create a safe place and want to push them was a strength that I saw in all three.
Yeah. Okay, so question 4, it talks about that we've been looking at curriculum for global education as part of the course. And then it asks, do you think that this kind of curriculum is appropriate for the settings portrayed in these videos? Um, I think that global education curriculum could offer a valuable perspective. Um, it will help students foster cultural awareness and empathy, and it can have them develop an understanding of the worldwide challenges. So I do think global themes are important, but I also think that we should prioritize the main content that should be teaching. So if that's something that we're going to add in, I don't think it should take away from like the main content being taught. Um, so I think a well-balanced approach would integrates global perspectives while ensuring that the core educational needs are still met.
Yeah, I completely agree with that. That's kind of what I was thinking about, like it is important. And I don't want to say it's not important. Of course we want kids to know about things that are happening around the world and, what we look at and things going on around the world and blah blah blah. But um, you know, I think the core subjects are always going to be the most important. Your math and your English and science and, kind of ties in with history, I think a little bit, but I would say, like Desiree said, focusing on those core subjects, I think to me would be the most important.
I completely agree with you guys. I definitely think that it's something that we need to teach those skills that Desiree was talking about, like empathy and awareness. Um, but I also don't think it should take away from what we're already teaching. And, having everything balanced, like Desiree said, that would be a great approach to teaching both, if there was a way to balance it all.
Yeah, I agree. I kind of went at this question in a different way. I think in our schools and our settings that we have in Texas, um, that global education is really important, especially for my kids that are immigrants. Um, they feel heard, they feel like I had that experience and we're talking about it. And then it gives my kids who have never had that experience a view into you could have this, like your friends have had this, like you need to take your education seriously and not for granted. Um, and so I think in those settings, in those contexts, yes, it's very important as long as it's well balanced, like y'all said. Um, I think in the context of the settings portrayed in the videos, having that global education would be kind of discouraging to those kids because they'd be learning about educational environments that are more advanced, like more developed than what they're currently in. Um, and I feel like they're already so discouraged from their environment that education going into curriculum would kind of hinder them a little bit.
That's a cool way of thinking about it. So, oh, were you going to say something, Sarah?
No, I was just saying, like, that's a really interesting perspective. I didn't even think about
No,
it like that. So it's a
neither.
good thought.
Okay. So question 5 asks, what can we learn from these stories to enrich our work here in the United States? This one was probably one of my favorite questions. I think some things that educators and students in the US can learn from these videos is to appreciate the value of education. So students in the case studies overcome major obstacles to learn, and they are aware of the opportunities that education has to offer, and they're so grateful to have that. Whereas I feel like in the US, like not saying all students, but most students just like overlook the value of education. And some people are like disrespectful to teachers, but like there's people in other countries that would love to have this opportunity and to learn from teachers. And I think it's important for teachers to recognize that barriers do exist, not just in other countries, but in the US too. Um, and we need to promote equity and focus teaching strategies that acknowledge diverse learning needs so we can create a welcoming environment.
Yeah. I think one thing that this experience helped me remember is that, again, no matter like can be going through all kinds of things, right? Like some students come to school and act perfectly normal and you have no idea what's going on in their home life, right? So like always remembering that, they have a life outside of school. There could be things going on outside of school, and just keeping that in mind. And then again, remembering to like know and know the value of education, right? Like how important it is, and constantly reminding our kids like you're lucky you get to be here, remember that, appreciate it, and just kind of again, like bouncing off of what Desiree said, just appreciating education that we get to be a part of it. So yeah.
I completely agree with what you guys said. This really like creates awareness for all the situations that are in other countries. And also to add, I guess like how I saw this question was like I was thinking about education in the United States, and I was like, we're already doing pretty well. So it's like this should inspire us to want to do better and to like want to, I don't know, I guess like extend like resources, like we're becoming aware, so it's like okay, so now what can we do to like help other countries or like spread awareness like more, like stuff like that. Like we're already doing such a great job, so it's like how can we do more to make it even better? And that's kind of how I thought about it.
Yeah. Yeah, I completely agree with y'all. I kind of took this question as like a self-reflection in my own teaching of how I am being supportive, and understanding of my students who have gone through these experiences or go through similar experiences. And just making sure that me as the teacher that I am making sure that I am giving those students the same opportunities, the same high expectations, the same um, equity in the classroom and accessibility in the classroom. Like I said, I wasn't able to translate for them, still to translate for them. So it's just making sure that they have the same availability and access to the education that they're here to have because they didn't have it in their old country or other kids don't have it in their home country. So just making sure that I keep that mindset as I'm teaching.
Wow. It was really cool seeing y'all's like insight on like what y'all took out of the video and also like learning more like about your classroom.
Yeah, that was a great discussion, guys.
Yeah,
Yeah, that
great
was
work,
good.
team.
All right.
Yay.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye.